If there's another term for President Trump, I don't know what happens to America. Truth is really important, but especially in intelligence. President Trump doesn't care about facts. President Trump doesn't care about the truth. He doesn't listen to his experts.
That was Michael Hayden. He's a former CIA director, former NSA head. He joined a running and growing list of former national security officials who have announced their support for Joe Biden with a warning against the threat posed by Donald Trump and the threat that he increasingly presents to our safety, our foreign alliances, and our national security. As perhaps made obvious by his amped-up Twitter activity, Donald Trump is currently on steroids to treat his coronavirus infection. It's a diagnosis that our next guest, another former CIA director, now warns is just another reason for us to feel alarmed in this moment. In a new book, Director Brennan writes, quote, "I sorely wish that I had never felt compelled to speak out as vociferously as I have against a sitting president of the United States. It has given me no pleasure to do so. But as long as Mr. Trump continues to trample the tenets of our democracy, lie to the American people, denigrate the office of the presidency, endanger our national security, and sully our reputation around the world, I will not relent in my criticism of him." Joining us now is John Brennan. His new book, Undaunted, My Fight Against America's Enemies at Home and Abroad, is just out. Also joining us, former managing editor at Time Magazine and former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, my often sidekick, Rick Stengel's here. And lucky for us, both of you are MSNBC analysts. Director Brennan, I want to start on the book. Take me, because I have heard this from former peers of yours in the intelligence community, that you speak for so many of them who, just from that sort of DNA that I think you describe in that excerpt, are just not comfortable stepping into the political fray. You have stormed into the political fray. You have drawn fire from this president, and you have advocated on behalf of American national security, but it hasn't been without a lot of arrows pointed at you. Just talk about that experience and how that informed the writing of the book.
Well, Nicole, as you said, I am uncomfortable speaking out so stridently against a sitting president of the United States. For over 33 years, I served presidents and administrations of both political parties and had tremendous respect and admiration for the seriousness with which they approach their job and their solemn duties. I clearly have seen that Donald Trump does not pay the same type of respect to the office of the presidency. We know that he had no experience coming into office, and I thought he was going to, I would hoped he was going to change his ways, but he didn't. And so therefore, having served my country for well over 3 decades and trying to protect the right of American citizens to speak out freely, I am now exercising that right, because clearly this is a very dangerous time, very abnormal time. And just like Mike Hayden, who you knew and worked with during the Bush administration, Mike is an outstanding patriot. He has served this country with great distinction over the course of his entire professional career. And despite suffering the debilitating effects of a stroke, his voice now is more powerful than ever in terms of underscoring the dangers of a Trump administration that is going to go into another 4 years of trampling our democratic foundations and principles, and as I said, sullying the reputation as well as the standing of the United States in this world. And so therefore, I'm continuing to speak out. That's one of the reasons why I decided to write this memoir, which is much more about my career and my being able to witness history, as opposed to just the interactions I've had with Donald Trump. I met him only once. But clearly, over the last 3.5 years, I have felt it my responsibility and obligation to underline just how challenging the future is if Donald Trump remains in the White House.
You know, Director Brennan, if I could just say, for the benefit of our readers, we've benefited so much outside of sort of the clash between yourself and the president. There have been some extraordinary moments during his presidency, the slaughter of Jamal Khashoggi, and your ability to help us understand what was going on behind the scenes. Can you just broaden the lens a little bit and help us understand what you think has happened to U.S. foreign policy under Donald Trump? And John Bolton gave us kind of an insider account of believing that U.S. foreign policy, at least as it pertained to China and Turkey, might have been so corrupted that he picked up the phone and called Bill Barr. And that's an inside account. What are your concerns just with your decades, 3 decades of relationships around the world?
Well, Donald Trump clearly operates like an authoritarian leader. The many authoritarian leaders that I have observed and analyzed over the course of my career, he has taken the pages out of their playbooks. He tries to suppress any type of political criticism or opposition. He tries to manipulate and control the instruments of power, intelligence, law enforcement, justice. He tries to denigrate the media, and in terms of any type of information that is put out that tries to really expose his fraudulent behavior as well as his dishonesty and his lies. And so therefore, when I think about how the United States has played this leading role in the free world over the last 75 years since World War II, and how countries around the world, our allies and partners, have looked for strong leadership from the United States, irrespective of the party affiliation of a president, I think they are very much have been unnerved over the last 3.5+ years, because Donald Trump continues looking at the world through this prism of what is best for Donald Trump. And his mantra of America first, is trying to play to his base here. And it's being heard around the world that the United States is going to do things to the exclusion of the interests of others as well as to global stability. And so that's why I think he is a very dangerous person to be at the helm of our government. And that's why I think that there is a lot of concern about what the future holds if, in fact, Donald Trump is reelected.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.